Okay, let's unpack this. Change is hard. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just a basic human truth, isn't it? Our brains. They just crave the familiar, the path we already know.
Right. But what happens when that familiar path is actually leading somewhere really destructive?
Yeah, when staying put has these devastating
Yeah.
consequences, that's the really tough terrain we want to get into in this deep dive.
Exactly. We're looking at why people get stuck, specifically focusing on addiction, where that resistance to change can seem so baffling,
Mm.
and the stakes are incredibly high.
Mm.
We've pulled insights from, well, various materials looking at this through different lenses, psychology, neurobiology, and also just powerful lived experiences, including concepts you find in recovery models like the 12 steps.
So our mission today really is to try and understand those deep barriers, the kind of invisible forces keeping people trapped, even when their life is just falling apart.
Yeah.
And maybe just as importantly, explore what these sources say is the tipping point, what finally cracks things open for that shift towards, healing.
So the big question we want to explore with you is, why do people stay stuck, sometimes for years, facing awful outcomes? And what does it actually take to break free and make that huge change?
Okay, let's jump right in. A key idea from the material is that this resistance, it's not just like a weakness or a character flaw. There's something more fundamental happening,
Yeah, it's almost wired in a way.
wired in. How so?
Well, our brains are built for efficiency, right? They love habits. Habits mean predictable neural pathways.
Okay.
So repeating something builds this sort of superhighway in the brain. And the brain prefers taking that known route because it saves energy. It's just biology.
And addiction, then, it sort of cleverly exploits this.
Totally exploits it. It hooks right into the brain's reward system, creating these incredibly strong, almost magnetic pathways, prioritizing the substance or the behavior over pretty much everything else.
Wow.
So trying to change means you're literally trying to dismantle those superhighways and build completely new ones.
And that's not easy.
Not at all. That rewiring process isn't just psychologically hard, it's physically, neurologically uncomfortable. Which explains why early recovery feels so incredibly challenging. Your brain is literally rebuilding itself.
Which, okay, brings us to this idea that sounds like a complete paradox, but it makes so much sense. The uncomfortable comfort zone.
Sounds weird, doesn't it? How can misery be comfortable?
Yeah.
But comfortable here just means familiar. The chaos, the pain, the fallout. If that's been your reality long enough, your brain, your sense of self kind of adapts.
So the unknown, even if it promises something better, feels scarier.
Way scarier than the known, predictable pain. It's that whole devil you know thing.
Right, like staying at a job you hate or a bad relationship, but just massively amplified by addiction.
Exactly. And the material points out, for some people, especially those with trauma or really deep shame, there's another layer.
Oh.
A subconscious belief almost that the pain is deserved, like it's part of their identity.
So changing would feel like
Mhm.
betraying who they are, even if who they are is miserable.
Yeah, precisely. Like they don't deserve better, or that suffering is just their lot. Changing feels fundamentally wrong in that context.
Wow, okay. That adds a whole other dimension. It's not just fear of the future, but maybe feeling unworthy of it.
Yeah.
And often guarding this whole painful setup is denial.
Denial. Yeah, that's described as a primary defense mechanism. And it's crucial to get this. It's not just lying to other people.
Relate to yourself.
Profoundly.
Yeah.
Often unconsciously.
Yeah.
It's the mind protecting the ego from a truth that feels just unbearable.
And the material mentions specific ways this shows up, right?
Yeah.
Like minimization
Yep. Downplaying how bad things are. It's not that serious.
or comparison,
Well, I'm not as bad as that person.
justification.
Finding reasons why the drinking or using is necessary, or, okay, I need it to relax. Everyone does it.
And blame.
Oh, yeah. Pointing the finger elsewhere. It's my stressful job. It's my partner. It's my childhood. Anything but taking responsibility.
And the key insight here is change just can't happen while that denial is fully in place.
Pretty much impossible. That first crack in the denial, that first flicker of real internal honesty, that's often seen as the absolute starting point for recovery.
But that moment of honesty must immediately bump up against a wall of fear.
Oh, absolutely. Huge fears. Beyond just the physical withdrawal, which is rough enough,
Right.
there are massive psychological fears. Fear of losing your identity, maybe your friends who are still using.
Fear of feeling all those emotions you've been numbing out for years.
Definitely. Fear of boredom, too. Like, what will life even be without this thing? Will it be gray and dull?
And the fear of failure. especially if you've tried before.
That's a huge one. Trying again and failing reinforces that feeling of hopelessness that I just can't do this.
Because the addiction itself twists your perception,
Oh, I,
right? Makes the substance seem like the source of all fun or meaning,
yeah,
even as it's destroying everything.
precisely. It warps reality. So recovery means walking through those fears, often without any guarantee of what's on the other side. It's more about faith than certainty at that point.
Which leads us to this core idea, the tipping point. The point where the pain of staying the same finally outweighs the fear of changing.
This is so fundamental. People generally don't make a massive shift until staying put becomes truly intolerable, more intolerable than the fear and discomfort of stepping into the unknown of recovery.
And this is often what people mean by hitting bottom.
Sort of, yeah. But the material is clear that bottoms look very different for everyone. It's not always, living under a bridge.
Right. It could be a health scare, losing a job, a relationship ending.
Or sometimes it's quieter, just this profound internal exhaustion, a moment where you think, I cannot live like this for one more day. It's deeply personal,
So the pain actually serves a purpose here. It's a catalyst.
a powerful one, but only when it hits that critical mass where the internal calculation becomes, okay, this hurts more than the fear of trying something different.
Another massive barrier mentioned is shame, that shame spiral.
Ugh, shame is just corrosive. It isolates you. So many people struggling with addiction carry this deep, profound sense of being fundamentally flawed, broken, unworthy.
Which leads to that why bother kind of thinking.
Exactly. Find this messed up. What's the point in even trying? It kills motivation.
And it creates that awful loop that you use to escape the pain. Then you feel overwhelming shame for using.
And then you use more to escape the shame. It's vicious.
And willpower alone doesn't break that.
Not usually, no. The material really stresses that the antidote is connection, empathy, being seen and accepted by others, often before you can accept yourself.
Community.
Yes, community normalizes the struggle. It chips away at that isolation and starts to replace the shame with hopefully some self-compassion.
This also seems linked to identity, like who you think you are gets tangled up in the addiction.
Oh, definitely. For some, being the addict or the rebel or the life of the party, it becomes their main identity.
So letting that go feels like
Yeah,
losing yourself?
totally. Even if that identity is causing immense pain, the ego fights really hard to protect that known story, that known self.
And the material suggests recovery isn't really about becoming someone totally different.
Right. It's often framed more as remembering or uncovering the self that was there before the addiction took over. But that kind of realization usually only comes after enough suffering has kind of humbled the ego, made space for a new perspective.
And speaking of suffering, that link between addiction and unresolved trauma keeps coming up in the source material.
It's a very, very common link. For lots of people, substance use starts as a coping mechanism, a way to manage feelings or memories linked to trauma abuse, neglect, loss, things that feel just unbearable.
So changing, getting sober, means potentially having to face those underlying wounds without the buffer.
Exactly, which is terrifying. It's why just stopping the substance often isn't enough. If the underlying trauma isn't addressed, relapse is really likely.
So trauma-informed support is critical.
Crucial. Safe environments, safe relationships, maybe a spiritual framework. Healing needs emotional safety. You can't unpack deep pain if you don't feel fundamentally safe doing it.
What about that feeling of just giving up? The material mentions learned helplessness.
Yeah, that's when repeated attempts to quit, followed by relapse, start to create this belief deep down that nothing will work, that you're just incapable of changing.
Like, I've tried everything, I'm just wired this way.
Exactly, and that leads straight to hopelessness.
Which must be one of the biggest barriers of all. If you don't believe change is possible.
Then why try? It kills willingness completely. But the antidote discussed is powerful. Seeing other people who have done it.
Peer support. Sponsorship.
Yes. Seeing someone who seems like you, who's been through similar things and who has found a way out that can spark hope. That tiny thought, if they could do it, maybe. Just maybe I can too. That little flicker is vital.
Okay, so bringing all these things together, the brain wiring, the comfort zone trap, denial, all the fears, the shame, identity issues, trauma that learned helplessness. What does the material point to as the typical sparks? What actually triggers the breakthrough?
Well, it's obviously different for everyone, but common themes do emerge. Sometimes it's a moment of sudden, intense clarity, a kind of spiritual awakening for some.
Or a big external crisis?
Definitely. A major consequence, a health scare, getting arrested, losing custody, a near-death experience. Sometimes it's seeing the pain in loved one's eyes.
Or just sheer exhaustion?
Total exhaustion, reaching the end of your rope physically and emotionally, or sometimes a well-planned intervention by people who care. It's often that culmination of pain finally reaching that tipping point we talked about.
And that moment, that surrender to, I can't do this anymore, that connects to things like step 1 in the 12 steps.
Exactly. Admitting you're powerless over the addiction and that life has become unmanageable. The sources often point to that specific act of surrender, letting go of the fight against reality, as the true beginning of change.
So once that window opens, once there's willingness, what tools does the material suggest are effective for actually building that new life?
Several key things come up repeatedly. Structured programs like 12-step meetings, offering that vital community and accountability.
Therapy.
Yes, therapy to dig into underlying issues, deal with trauma, learn new coping skills.
Yeah.
Medication-assisted treatment can be really helpful for some addictions, managing cravings and withdrawal.
Okay.
Finding some kind of spiritual connection, whatever that means for the individual, to build meaning and hope. Routine and structure are huge, replacing the chaos. And also service work.
Helping others.
Yeah, helping others. It builds self-worth, reinforces connection, and gets you out of your own head.
Because it's not just about stopping the bad stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about actively building a life that feels good, a life worth staying sober for.
That's it, exactly. You're not just taking away, you're adding, creating something new and meaningful that addiction can't really compete with anymore.
And tying back to shame and isolation, connection seems to be the thread running through all of this.
The material couldn't be clearer on that. It basically argues the opposite of addiction isn't just sobriety, it's genuine connection.
Because addiction thrives in isolation.
It pushes people away, makes them hide. Healing happens in community when you feel safe enough to be seen.
So support groups, sponsors, therapists, mentors,
Yeah.
they provide that lifeline.
They break the isolation, they offer accountability, they hold the belief for you when you can't hold it for yourself. They create that safe space to be vulnerable, face the fears, and practice living in a new way.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what's the main takeaway message from these sources?
I think it's that even though the barriers to change are immense, really profound, wired into our biology, tangled up with fear, trauma, denial, shame, change is absolutely possible, even when it feels completely insurmountable.
And that pain, the very pain that drove the destructive behavior, it can actually become the fuel for transformation.
Exactly. When it hits that critical tipping point, when staying stuck finally hurts more than the fear of the unknown, that creates the opening. The energy shifts.
The material leaves us with that powerful idea. Nothing changes if nothing changes.
But if one thing changes, everything can.
Yeah. And ultimately, it seems like this whole process hinges on willingness, surrender, and just holding on to that little spark of hope.